Shalom, and welcome to JTS's exclusive webinar with Chancellor Arnold Eisen and our synagogue friends of JTS Shoals and congregants. Today's webinar is entitled A World Turned Upside Down, a Conservative Jewish Response. My name is Joan Goodman, and I'm Director of Lay Leadership. Before I introduce Chancellor Eisen, I'd like to briefly explain our Synagogue Friends program. It's an important partnership between JTS and conservative synagogues throughout North America. Through synagogue support, JTS is able to train extraordinary Jewish clergy, educators, and leaders who go on to serve the conservative movement and the broader Jewish community, touching Jews of all ages and at all stages of the life cycle. When synagogues and their congregations join together and pool funds to support JTS, the whole Jewish community benefits. Today's webinar is being offered exclusively to Shoals in the top 2 giving categories of the Synagogue Friends campaign, Yedidim and Re'im. Thank you for your generous support and friendship. The following synagogues and their congregants were invited to participate. Addis Israel in Washington, D.C., Addith Israel in Marion, Pennsylvania, Agudath Israel, Caldwell, New Jersey, Bethel Synagogue, Omaha, Nebraska, Beth Tzedek in Toronto, B'nai Jeshurun, Pepper Pike, Ohio, Chizik Amunu in Baltimore, Maryland, Congregation Addith Jeshurun in Louisville, Kentucky, Congregation Ohav Shalom in Wallingford, Pennsylvania, Congregation Shaarei Tzedek, Southfield, Michigan, Dix Hills Jewish Center in Dix Hills, New York, Har Zion Temple, Penn Valley, Pennsylvania, Park Avenue Synagogue, New York City, Shaarei Zion in Montreal, Temple Beth Shalom in Livingston, New Jersey, Temple Beth Shalom, Cherry Hill, New Jersey, Temple Beth Shalom, Roslyn, New York, Temple Emmanuel, Newton, Massachusetts, Temple Emmanuel, Closter, New Jersey, Temple Israel, Natick, Massachusetts, Temple Israel Center in White Plains, New York, Temple Neve Shalom, Metuchen, New Jersey, Temple Shalom in Greenwich, Connecticut, and the Park Synagogue, Cleveland, Ohio. Again, thank you so much for your support and partnership. This evening's program will last for approximately 1 hour. Sources are available via the link above the video. Chancellor Eisen will answer questions at the end. To submit questions, please use the chat window below at any time. Unfortunately, we may not have time to answer every question. And now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Chancellor Eisen. Arnold M. Eisen, one of the world's foremost authorities on American Judaism, is the 7th Chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary. Since taking office in 2007, Chancellor Eisen has transformed the education of religious, educational, professional, and lay leaders for North American Jewry. During his tenure, Chancellor Eisen has placed significant emphasis on strengthening Jewish learning in the community, creating programs that extend the reach of JTS scholarship and resources beyond the campus of JTS to learners around the world. These programs include expanded access to the treasures of the JTS library through increased digitization, a new JTS Fellows program and for adult learning, and the development of the JTS Torah Online, a rich menu of videos, podcasts, and Torah commentary. And now it gives me great honor to introduce Chancellor Eisen.
Thanks, Joan. Thank you all for being with us this evening, and thank you for support of JTS through the program that brings us all together this evening. JTS relies on its friends in more ways than one. We rely on your support, and we rely on your feedback, and we are here for you, and we're here to be in service to the community. So please always let us know how we can serve you better, and I look forward to hearing your questions and comments later on this evening. As you can imagine, the title for this evening originated in a discussion that took place not long after the U.S. presidential election in November. We could have used the title even before that election because it was obvious, even before the change in administration, that we are going through a period of unprecedented change. This change is cultural. Certainly it affects all of our organizations. It affects synagogues. It affects everyone. It's societal. It's political now. But it's also technological. When people tell me with confidence that 10 years from now, all of us will have driverless cars as a matter of course, we'll have robots throughout our houses and our offices, that everything will be turned upside down even more than it has been in the last 10 years through the introduction of smartphones, I know that we can't train Jewish leaders for a reality as different from the past as this one, using the same techniques that we've used in the past. So it's our special responsibility at JTS, preparing Jews for a world that we're about to inhabit, preparing leaders to guide us through that world, that we be sensitive to what's changing and figure out how to respond at the same time as not losing our grip, at the same time not cowering and not going wild with speculation about what might happen, but let's figure out exactly what we're facing and how to deal with it. So it was in that spirit that we decided to devote this evening's webinar to the topic of a world turned upside down and 3 ways in which these changes are affecting Jewish leaders like you, whether lay leaders or professional leaders right now, and will certainly be affecting even more so the people that we're training at JTS to be the lay and professional leaders of tomorrow. So I'm going to talk about each of these 3 aspects in turn, drawing on material that I've presented in the past few months to various audiences, and I'm thinking about anew every day, every week, certainly for this program. But I want to begin with some thoughts about Jewish leadership. So last night I had a real treat that I want to share with you all, which is that I was invited by List College to the end of year dinner, at which List College gathers all of its student leaders of various sorts. These are the heads of the Israel program, the heads of what we call List College 101, which is an introduction to the Jewish tradition and the Jewish community. These are people who are supervising the dormitories. These are people who are writing for the newspaper, et cetera, et cetera. And with all of these leaders in the room, about 30 or 35 of them in one place, I decided the most important thing I could do was talk to them about what makes a Jewish leader. What is it to be a leader, and what is it in particular to be a Jewish leader? So I'm going to just recapitulate part of that conversation in brief, in shorthand, as it were. And then I'm going to go on and talk about how these lessons play themselves out in these several different areas, affecting all of our Jewish leaders, all of us Jews, as a matter of fact, right now. Let's start out straight and say that a Jewish leader is not just a Jew who's a leader. And a Jewish leader is not just a Jew who is leading a Jewish organization. You get closer to the mark when you say a Jewish leader is someone who embodies Jewish values in that leadership. But I would go even further and say that a Jewish leader is devoted to advancing the cause of the Jewish people or the Jewish tradition or both. Advancing the cause of the Jewish people, which means the Jewish communities, or the Jewish tradition, or both. In other words, a Jewish leader has to be wrapped up in the advancement of Judaism. And when I say Judaism, I want to make it clear that from the hallways of JTS, we have 2 great competing definitions of what Judaism is. We had Professor Abraham Joshua Heschel here, for whom Judaism was, first and foremost, a religious tradition. It had to express itself in personal ethics and in social justice activities. It expressed itself in every part of life. But if you read Heschel's thought, Judaism begins with being touched by God, with being aroused by the wonder of the world, and therefore being drawn to know the creator of that wonder, to being in touch with the Holy One, blessed be He. But for Mordechai Kaplan, who also taught at JTS and passed by Heschel in the hallways every day for many years, Judaism is, as the famous title of his book says, it's a civilization. It's not a religion. Judaism is the civilization of a people. Jews are first and foremost a people, and Kaplan's particular aim in emphasizing this was to include many young Jews who were serving as Jewish leaders or who wanted to be Jewish leaders but did not believe in God and questioned the legitimacy of their mission. How can I be an authentic Jewish leader if I'm not religious? And Kaplan wanted to reassure such Jews that to serve the Jewish people, to work for the Jewish community, is to serve the cause of Judaism because Judaism is such a civilization. So I tried to stress to the students last night, and looking at their faces, I can't see yours, but I could see theirs in a room, and I knew, because I know them, that for some of them, Judaism is overwhelmingly a religious tradition. But for others of them, religion is not what draws them to Judaism, and they are serving the Jewish community and the Jewish people for other reasons. And I wanted to reassure them that that is entirely legitimate, and we welcome their service. So then I said to them, okay, let's say that Judaism goes back to the original story that we tell about ourselves, the sacred story of Mount Sinai, where we were made parties to a covenant. And the amazing thing is about the Jewish tradition that distinguishes it from all other religious traditions is that at that very first moment of Sinai, at that covenant, God not only joined with us in forming a religious group, but we became a people. We became a kingdom of priests and holy nation. So these two aspects, what you might call the Heschel aspect and the Kaplan aspect, these go back to the very beginning of our history. And to serve the Jewish community or the Jewish people, and to serve God, try to follow the will of God in the world, these are the two halves of the Jewish covenant from the very beginning. And so to me, to be a Jewish leader, is to be in service to that covenant, to be advancing the cause of that covenant in the world today. And if you're committed to that, then you've met the first qualifications of being a Jewish leader. Now, of course, we're not going to agree on how to do that. And that's also part of what it means to be a Jewish leader, is to know a lot about our history and about how we developed, and to know about the competing definitions of Judaism, of Jewish belief and Jewish practice all along the way. And that's part of what distinguishes conservative Jewish leadership, though we are aware always of this plurality of definitions of Judaism and of Jewish life. Heschel wrote his great book, Torah min hashamayim, Torah from Heaven, and I'm taking a very long and complex book and abbreviating it mercilessly to say that one of the lessons of that book is Judaism has always taught that Torah is from heaven, and Jews have always disagreed about what it means to say that Torah is from heaven. So I want Jewish leaders to be inclusive, to be pluralist, to have room for more definitions of Judaism and the Jewish community than the one that they in particular hold. And that's part of why conservative Judaism has always been distinguished by a commitment to Klal Yisrael, all the people of Israel, in all of their varieties. And it hasn't seen these varieties as a weakness, it's seen them as a strength. Then I talked to the kids last night and would like to share with you some thoughts about leadership that I've accumulated in my 10 years now as Chancellor of JTS, my reading in the immense leadership literature, and my dialogues with existing leaders in a variety of fields. All of those leaders that I talked to a person, said to me that the number one quality of a leader, without which you cannot lead, is personal integrity. Now, why is personal integrity so important for leaders in particular? Think about it. If you want people to stand with you, you have to know who you are and where you stand and what you stand for. And it has to be clear to them, to those who are going to stand with you, where you're standing. And that means that to be a leader means to serve a higher cause, not to serve yourself. They're not going to join with you in service of you. They're going to join with you because they know that you are in service to the higher goal that they too want to serve. And you not only need to know this about yourself, and they need to know about you in order to stand with you and to follow you. To be a leader is to rejoice in the fact that people are going to walk ahead of you. They're going to take the path that you're on further than you've walked on it. They're going to take it in places that you could not have conceived or imagined. There's a midrash which says, why was Abraham greater than Noah? Because it says of Noah that he walked with God, but it says of Abraham that God said to Abraham, go and walk before me. When your child is little, you hold that child by the hand and you want the child to walk with you. When the child grows up, you don't want them to be holding your hand all the time. You want them to be going out there ahead of you along the path that you have charted, and to be confident that they're going to walk further ahead of you on that path. So if you're a leader, You want people walking out there ahead of you, confident that they're going to take your teachings in new directions that you could not have imagined yourself. So that's just another way in which it's necessary to know yourself, know who you are, what you stand for, in order to have people stand with you. And I would say as a final word on this subject, that that's even more true in a time like ours when things are changing. Because in times when everything is static, you can afford to follow the mold. You can be a teacher just like the teachers you had. You can be a rabbi just like the rabbis that you knew growing up. You can be a parent just like your parents. But in a time of change, to follow old recipes when the situation is so different is a course for disaster. So to be a Jewish leader who is immensely concerned about tradition, we're not just here to revolutionize the world. We care about the continuity of this covenant. We're here to live and teach the Torah and to practice it. I'm loyal to what has been in a big way. I can't disconnect from that. I can't break away from that. But I know that precisely in order to continue that path, I have to change it. And this is most visible at JTS when I have a conversation, as I did just 2 hours ago, with a woman who's about to graduate from rabbinical school, reflecting on what it is to be a woman rabbi and how impossible that dream would have been only several decades ago, and how much of the world, including the Jewish world, still does not accept the legitimacy of that path. But we're confident that had we not made that change, we would not have been faithful to the tradition, because sometimes precisely to be a leader, a Jewish leader, means you have to carry the tradition forward by bold and loving and learned change from what you have done until now. And therefore, you have to know who you are and what you stand for. And the people who are walking with you and following you and walking ahead of you have to be confident that when you change, you're doing it to serve the cause that they too hold sacred. And they can trust you to lead them in this change. All right, having said that, let me now speak briefly about each of the three topics. First, you may have seen my blog, and I'm not going to read it to you now, but I gave a speech at the convocation where we honor rabbis who've been out in the field 25 years or more. And I made the case that rabbis, precisely now, in this time of change and in this time of discord, should be speaking out about moral issues of the day. And I tried to make the case there that there's a difference between rabbis doing a job which is inherent in the rabbinic vocation, which is to say what's right, which is to say what Torah has to say about issues that concern us all. It's very hard for a rabbi to teach Breshit chapter 1 and not talk about our responsibilities to be stewards of the planet. It's very difficult for a rabbi to teach Parashat Mishpatim right after the Aseret HaDibrot at Sinai and not talk about treatment of the stranger and the widow and the orphan. And this is very different from being a political operative. This is very different from saying vote Democratic or vote Republican. And I'll talk to you about why that is so in a moment. But for a rabbi not to engage moral issues, not to speak out about right with a capital R and wrong with a capital W and truth with a capital T and falsehood with a capital F, that is to abandon part of the rabbinic vocation. That's part of the calling. And when I first gave this talk, we were in Parashat Truma, talking about the construction of the sanctuary, and I put it in these terms. I said, if the only function of those Israelites in building that tabernacle was to saw the wood to a certain length and hammer the nails correctly, you don't need brilliant craftsmen and architects and designers like Bezalel, who are gifted with wisdom and insight and skill, as the Torah keeps emphasizing they are. So the Torah is making a point, which is a basic Jewish point about covenant, and certainly a tenet of conservative Judaism, that God needs us to be God's partners in the world, the same way that God needs us to be partners in building this tabernacle, and needs all of our wisdom and all of our experience and all of our talent and all the way all those Israelites, every single one of them made a contribution to the tabernacle, not just a financial contribution, but a contribution of skill and talent. And above all these efforts stood a master architect and craftsman like Bezalel. God needs all that from us. And God certainly needs all that from our leaders. God needs our leaders' voices. There's a piece in this week's portion, Tazria Metzora, where the priest has this job of pronouncing pure and impure. And I would say that that too is a fundamental calling, certainly of rabbinic leaders in today's society, is to pronounce the difference between what is pure and what is not pure. The priest can't cure leprosy, but the priest can let us know the difference and can bind up our community into a whole once the prescribed period of time has elapsed for the treatment of the leper and the leper has been cleansed and can rejoin the community. So the priest, the rabbi as priest, has a role in pronouncing pure from impure. The rabbi as prophet certainly has a role in making the distinction between right and wrong and calling out injustice. There's a difference between the biblical commandment to take care of the poor, to make sure the widow and the orphan have what they need. There's a difference between that and the endorsement of political platforms designed to achieve that end. There's more than one way to accomplish these biblical calls. So you can't identify your particular politics with what the Bible has in mind, but there are limits to compatibility. So you can say that to ignore the poor, to say the hell with them, to say we don't care about other people, there are ways of disobeying biblical imperatives, and it's the rabbi's job to call out that disobedience for what it is. To say that widows and orphans don't matter and we're going to leave them in their poverty, or to say, as the Talmud puts in the mouth of one of the enemies of the Jews at the time of Rabbi Akiba, if the poor are poor, they're meant to be poor, let them stay poor. You cannot accept that as a legitimate reading of Judaism. But neither is partisan politics a legitimate activity. So I'm not calling on rabbis to be politicians. I'm not calling on rabbis to be endorsers of particular party platforms. But what I am saying is that for rabbis not to speak out on moral issues of clarity is to abandon your vocation. And I would say, venturing into the territory that's on everyone's mind, that this problem has become more acute since November because we have a president who's a proclaimed disruptor. He's breaking with long-standing, bipartisan, domestic and foreign policy. He's breaking explicitly with long-held norms of the Judeo-Christian tradition, ridiculing some of those norms. So for a rabbi not to be able to talk about the issues on the table just because the President of the United States is on one side of these debates is a problem. It means abandoning your voice. So I hope that the distinction I'm trying to make between taking partisan political stands on the one hand and standing up for the values of Judaism on the other hand, I'm saying rabbis should not do the former, but in my view, they're commanded to do the latter. I have to share with you in this context a teaching that Heschel left with me, and he didn't write it. I'll just tell you, if you don't mind, the personal story, which if you've heard me speak, you may have heard this story before, but one of the greatest gifts of my life, and probably the reason why I'm sitting in this chair right now as Chancellor of JTS, is that in 1971, I came to this building to interview Abraham Joshua Heschel for my college newspaper and proceeded to talk to him for 2 hours about the concerns that I held deep. And one of the questions I had to have answered from Heschel is what gave him the right to tell people that the Vietnam War was evil, and what gave him the right to say at the beginning of God in Search of Man that religion had become, for many people, irrelevant, dull, oppressive, and insipid. And at first, I have to tell you, Heschel tried to avoid the question. He said, some people like vanilla ice cream and some people like chocolate ice cream. And my amazing response, with the chutzpah that only a 20-year-old could possibly muster, was to say, Professor Heschel, we're not talking about ice cream here. We're talking about people's lives. So come on, what gives you the right to do this? And then he finally came out with a sentence, that was more or less like this, and I'll never forget it, and it animates me to this day, when he said to me, "I am the heir to a great religious tradition, and as such, it is not just my right, it is my duty to speak in its name as best I can, knowing that other people will speak in its name differently." To me, that's the best we can do. It's part of the givens of the situation that other people are going to interpret Torah differently than I am. But I can't not be a teacher of Torah just because I know that other people are teaching Torah differently. It's not only my right, but when I'm inside this tradition, learning it, practicing it, it's my duty to speak in its name as best I can. And I would urge us all at this time of great change to try to do that. The second issue I want to address briefly is anti-Semitism. And it's going to be in the same spirit. I happened to write about this before we found out that the person phoning in the bomb threats to the JCCs was a young and apparently disturbed Israeli. But that doesn't take away the problem. I don't think there's any doubt in the United States, and I would add also in Canada, I want to thank Norman Kahn of Beth Tzedec for drawing to my attention this is not just a problem in the United States of late. It's a problem that is true in Canada as well. We've had a spike in anti-Semitism. The ADL just issued a new report. We've had a spike in hate crimes of all sorts. I felt personally connected to the cemetery vandalism in Philadelphia because it happens that my great-grandparents' graves are in that cemetery. My cousin bicycled out there immediately to see what had happened and discovered that my family, thank goodness, was not desecrated because perhaps their graves were right along the fence and the vandals chose to do things more in secret in the middle of the night and they hit the graves that were further inside the cemetery. But still, it touched me. People felt it as a real injury. They'd been wounded. They'd been personally affected by this, and I understand that. And there's no doubt that we're all taking greater security measures than we have in the past. At JTS, I can tell you that we have thousands of people passing through our doors, and we've just installed metal detectors because the New York City Police Department and those who are advising the federations on how to maintain security for Jewish institutions advised us to do so. So we have upgraded the security at JTS. We can't afford to take chances. And believe me, I don't want any leader in the Jewish world to take a chance on this. We cannot afford to be cavalier. We cannot afford to dismiss the problem. This is the world we live in. Scholars will tell us that anti-Semitism in the modern period is not the same as it was in the ancient world or the Middle Ages. They'll also tell us that there are a large number of varieties of anti-Semitism, and until recently, much of the anti-Semitic incidents that we've been seeing in Europe and many of those in America have been done by Muslims. It's anti-Jewish behavior that's perpetrated by Muslims. And lately, the alt-right has become much more active and much more visible, whether it's in Montana or elsewhere, that neo-Nazi groups and KKK groups and others are on the march. And what can one say? Here it is. The causes are complex and in dispute, but it's there. But here's what I want to say to Jewish leaders. For all that we should take the problem seriously, let's not lose our perspective on this. Let's be calm. Let's be sober. Let's not close our eyes to the issue. But as Jewish leaders, whom I'm defining in the way I did at the very beginning of this talk, who are serving the Jewish community and trying to get others of multiple viewpoints and multiple generations to serve the community, we cannot and must not make Judaism an enterprise based on fear. Young people, and not just young people, will not rally around this tradition because they think people hate them. Quite the opposite. The less secure you are personally in your Jewish identity, the more you will run away from Judaism and the Jewish community at the first sight of anti-Semitism. The more you feel vulnerable, the less secure you are. You don't know who you are as a Jew, but you know that people hate you. Why would you want to cooperate with this tradition or this community? So I would urge us all as Jewish leaders, at the same time as we don't minimize the threat, whether it's here at home or in Europe or in Israel. Yes, our people has real enemies, but we proceed to be Jewishly alive, vibrant, creative, bold, loving, disciplined, Torah-observing, God-serving people, despite the anti-Semitism and not because of it. We're not going to get Jews to be Jewish just despite the anti-Semites. That's not going to work. We're going to get Jews to be Jewish by furnishing them powerful experiences of Jewish meaning with a capital M and Jewish community with a capital C. And that's what we Jewish leaders provide. And the more we can provide that and hold out hope for real cooperation with others, the more that I think our community and our tradition will thrive. And here I just want to say something that I'm really proud of that we did at JTS. As a result of these factors we've been talking about, we didn't want to circle the wagons. We wanted to reach out in new alliances. And so right before Passover, JTS organized a march through Harlem. Hundreds and hundreds of people, JTS students and faculty and staff and students from the Union Theological Seminary across the street, clergy and believers, worshipers from black churches in Harlem, from a mosque in Harlem. And you can imagine the scene of hundreds of people beginning to march from JTS, a series of mercifully small, short speeches, and then we took off to Union Theological Seminary and then marched through Harlem, accumulating more marchers everywhere we went, ending at the National Black Theater just off 125th Street in Harlem. It was a very proud moment for all of us. We have allies. I myself have had the privilege of engaging in Bible study with black and Latino clergy in Harlem over the past several months. And we're all so drawn to this because it emphasizes our common humanity and the problems we face together. And for me as a Jew, the week before Passover, right before I'm going to say Halach Mayanya, right before I'm going to say this is the bread of affliction, I'm being called upon to reach out to others and bring them near. This year we are slaves. We, there's a big we here. To do this the week before Passover was immensely meaningful to me. And I'm sure it was not just me, we were doing this partly as a response to this anti-Semitism, grateful to our non-Jewish friends and neighbors who stood up for us, helped rebuild those cemeteries that had been vandalized, called us to let us know that they stood with us when the JCCs were being threatened. We want to reach out to them and tell them that we're standing with them like neighbors should. The final thing I want to say, because I'm the head of an institution of higher education, and I teach students, and many of these students are Lisk College students who study either at Barnard College or Columbia University along with JTS, and they face an incredible amount of anti-Israel propaganda on those campuses. I wanted to briefly talk to you about BDS and the anti-Israel sentiment, and let's be frank about it, the anti-Semitism that our students encounter. And again, I have never been in favor of rose-colored glasses, and I think to be a Jewish leader and to wear rose-colored glasses and to pretend that problems do not exist is to betray the trust of those who follow you and to betray your calling as a Jewish leader. As a Jewish leader, you got to face up to the problems that face you. And when you have young people coming to you and telling you that it makes them really uncomfortable to walk across Columbia's campus because there's a whole week of anti-apartheid activities where there are mock Palestinian graves and people dressed up as Israeli soldiers killing Palestinians, and you as a young Jewish student are forced to walk past this every day, you cannot but be disturbed. And so you come to JTS not just to take courses and to learn, but you come back to your community, you come back to your home, you come back to people who are going to reassure you that Jews are not murderers, that we're not engaged in a colonialist, imperialist, apartheid enterprise. And so again, I'm calling upon us Jewish leaders to exercise balance here. We're not going to be Jews and supporters of Israel just to spite BDS and the apartheid people. We're going to know who we are and what we stand for, and because of who we are and what we stand for, and because we serve this covenant of ours, we're going to stand up for Israel. And we're going to stand up for Israel fully, and we're going to respect other people who disagree with us about Israel. And as a person who deals with young people all the time, I can plead with you all, please do not tell young people that you have no place at a Jewish table unless you agree with me about Israel. You can explain to them why you disagree with the stance they're going to take. And I think I've been pretty forceful in writing and in speaking in talking about why I think BDS is not only wrong but reprehensible. But I don't want any Jewish young person to feel that there's a litmus test for joining the Jewish community, and unless you agree with Jewish elders about Israel, you don't belong there. We have to do a better job at talking to young people, and let's be honest, we've got to do a better job at talking to one another when it comes to Israel. And as we approach our 69th Yom HaAtzmaut, it's a good time to re-examine ourselves on this question. To me, I have to give you my point of view about BDS, and of course I'm open to people telling me that I'm wrong. BDS has not resulted, to my knowledge, in a single decision to disinvest. No college or university has done so, and I doubt anyone will. It has not resulted, I think, in any harm to the state of Israel. I do not think that in the world today, a world of ISIS and Al-Qaeda and a Middle East that's in flames, where Israel is obviously not the source of the problems in the region, I don't think that smart young people at colleges and universities are going to be drawn in large numbers to a message that tells them that especially Palestinian terrorists, are pure and good, while Israelis are the picture of evil. That's not going to happen. The damage that BDS does, as I tried to make clear in that example of the student walking across the Columbia campus during Apartheid Week, the damage that it does is to Jewish self-esteem. We can't afford to let a single Jewish young person feel less self-respect, feel shame at being a Jew. I want every young person to be proud of being a Jew, no matter what kind of Jewish community they belong to, no matter how they practice Judaism. They're in flux. By definition, they're young. They're deciding what kind of person they're going to be, which means what kind of Jewish person they're going to be. And it's our job, certainly at JTS, to strengthen them and hopefully turn them into people who are committed to the covenant in one of the ways that our people serves the covenant. That's our job as Jewish leaders. But in order to do that job correctly, we're going to have to exercise the skill we teach our students in the clinical pastoral education program. We're going to have to listen well. And our first job with people who disagree with us on Israel, especially if they're young people, is to hear them out and listen to them and patiently explain to them why we, open-minded people, pluralistic people, are such firm supporters of Israel, why for many of us it's a non-negotiable commitment in our life and a major source of the community and of the meaning that makes life worthwhile for us. So again, on BDS, like on anti-Semitism, like on the issue of rabbis speaking out, we have a proud tradition of reason combined with passion, of following the ways of our ancestors and taking those ways forward in some modes that our ancestors might not recognize. We have to be smart at the same time as we have to be caring and compassionate. We have to be proud of who we are at the same time as we have to know that there's lots of good people out there in the world who are different from us. And we have to make alliances with those people because they're going to be on the same side of the struggle. JTS stands with our students when they face these issues, and it's our calling, I think, as a seminary. It's our mission to stand with you all. We're here, as it says in our mission statement, to serve and strengthen Jewish lives, Jewish traditions, and Jewish communities. And I'll close by saying if we can help you through this cause in coming years, please let us know how, and we'll be happy to work with you. I want to end with a very short Dvar Torah, and then I'm looking at my compatriots here. I think we have some questions. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Good. So I'll turn to questions. But, we just marked Yom HaShoah, and we're about to mark Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut. And it doesn't quite work out perfectly with the Torah portions this year. But next Shabbat, 10 days from now or so, after Yom Ha'atzmaut, we're going to be reading the double portion, Acharei Mot Kedoshim. And to my mind, one of the profoundest things the Torah says to us is contained in the title of that double portion. So in the original, of course, Acharei Mot, which means after the death, refers to after the death of Aaron's two sons. For us, it refers to the fact that all of us are living after the Holocaust. And I can't prove it, none of us can, but I believe that we're still living very much in the shadow of that trauma. Many of us in our personal lives are responding to the Holocaust. Many of us do things because of the Holocaust and because of our conviction that it must not happen again, and we must not forget. I spoke to someone recently who has 5 kids and wanted to have 6. Why'd you have 5 kids? Why'd you want to have 6? Quote, 1 for every million. We're driven acharei mot. But how do you respond to mot? And I think a profound moment in the Torah comes when it gives you Aaron's response to the death of his 2 sons. He doesn't, like Moses, try to find a theological explanation for the death of his 2 sons. It says, Vayidom Aharon. Aaron was silent. He was silent. He didn't throw off his mantle. He didn't stop serving God. He didn't stop being a priest. But nor did he forget that a great tragedy had just occurred to him. And he went on. And if you ask yourself as a Jew, how do I respond acharei mot after the Holocaust? The Torah gives you the answer. Kedoshim tihiyu. Be holy. Be holy. Do good in the world. And we have 2 main ways, 2 main frameworks as Jews in 2017 for doing good in the world. One of them is in the diaspora communities, none better for Jews than the United States and Canada, the 2 finest Jewish diasporas we've ever had in the history of the Jewish people. And another way, of course, is to try to do good in the sovereign state of Israel. And we're not going to be perfect. We're going to make mistakes and let's own up to them and let's try to do better. But I think the lesson here is that acharei mot, you don't sit back and search for explanations. You don't wallow in pity. You don't complain. Your job is to do good. And so the question that should face us all as lay leaders or professional leaders, how do we do good? How do we do Kedoshim? What is it in these circumstances, in these particular circumstances, how do we follow the commandment, Kedoshim tihiyu? And of course, it's in that portion that we have the commandment to love our neighbors as ourselves, but we also find all sorts of other ethical principles, whether it's individual ethics or social justice ethics, that are in that portion, Kedoshim. And I would just end by saying that, as usual, the Torah knows where we are, knows where we're going to be, and it gives us an instruction manual for living in this unprecedented situation. And with that, I think I'll stop and turn to my team here and say, Joan, you have a question for me?
Yes, we have a couple of questions.
Good.
What can we do as Jews on a practical local level to temper this new environment where a fringe of previously unacceptable anti-Semitic thought and speech have been mainstreamed by the social media?
So the social media have become a plague on this. Obviously, there are many benefits, and every time I criticize them, my younger friends who are on social media, and one of those in the room with me tonight, Tim Bernard, who's helping us with this effort, remind me of all the good that social media are doing. I blame talk radio for a lot of this, actually, because it legitimized a way of speaking which was previously not okay in public. And every time I turn into talk radio, I'm disgusted by the level of discourse, not by the things people say as much as by how they say it. And this discourse, I now see it when a congressman goes home to his or her district. We see this on TV, we hear it on the radio. They're subjected to vilification and the F word. I cannot imagine people using the F word to talk to a congressman. I wasn't raised that way. My God, my mother would have had a fit. Right? And she would be right, because human decency and civility are very important virtues. Preaching doesn't do any good. So only examples do good. We've got to teach our kids the difference. We've got to teach our kids that something has happened to public discourse, and we're not going to be cool about it and just say, oh, we must be old fogies because we don't think you should use language like this. And we don't think it's okay to rob people of their God-given dignity by talking to them as if they were animals or as if they were dirt. We cannot allow that to happen in our families, in our classrooms, and we cannot allow it to happen in any room we're in. And I think we just have to stand up. Certainly as leaders, we have to stand up and say, as we used to say to our kids, that is not okay. You cannot talk like that. And when someone takes a Jewish leader whom they happen to disagree with on the issue of Israel and plasters her face on a bus and says, attack this person because she disagrees with you about Israel, this is a horrendous state of affairs and we can't stand for it, and Jewish leaders have to unite. Jewish leaders across the board, left, right, Orthodox, Reform, conservative, secular, whatever, Israeli, American, we've got to stand up for civility, for the need of the Jewish people to respect one another and for respect non-Jews, and to stop talking this way to and about other people. Leviticus condemns it. It's condemned in the Torah. It's not okay. It's wrong. And but I don't think that preaching is going to solve the problem. It's going to have to be by example and by standing up and calling it out and saying, when you hear it, we're not going to make that okay. We're not going to settle for that. And when discourse in your congregation becomes impossible because the extremists won't let moderates talk, you've got to make sure that the moderates are going to talk anyway. You can't allow Jews to be silenced on any subject of great Jewish concern, certainly not on Israel.
Okay, and here's an interesting follow-up to that, in a way. Are there dangers in choosing new allies as well as the benefits you described?
Do I have to repeat the question, Joan? Can people
No.
hear you? They're fine. So, are there dangers
In choosing new allies.
I think I know what's behind that question. Look, let's be frank. When JTS reached out to Muslims some years ago and began doing workshops at JTS with Muslims, people said to us, "You can't work with Muslims, right? Because, quote, they all hate Jews." And we said, "That's ridiculous. And unless you're going to work with the Muslims who can be your allies and strengthen them against the extremists, they have no clout against those extremists. So you have to work with those Muslims and prove to the Muslim community that there are Jews and Christians and others who are going to stand with them and stand up for them. So you have to do your homework. You have to know who it is you're dealing with." And this is very relevant to the college campus because I heard a young woman last night. This is not like ancient history. This is Columbia University right now, that a Hillel, which stands up for Israel, is subject to exclusion from some student organizations on the left and some students of color who say that if you stand up for Israel, we're not going to work with you. And they say to me, "What are we supposed to do?" And I say, "You have no choice. You're not going to betray Israel in the interest of forming a lie. Because they have to know who you are and respect you for what you stand for. And if they can't work with you for what you stand for, then I'm sorry, you can't work with them, and they lose the benefit of having your alliance." But that doesn't mean you don't work with people who disagree with you, and that's a different question. We have to be prepared to work with people who disagree with us about things, the same way they're prepared to work with us, even though they disagree with us. So this is not a simple matter. It's never been a simple matter. We Jews have long experience with this, and I learned this lesson, frankly, in Israel, by watching Israel make alliances that it needed to have to stand up against its enemies, make alliances even with countries that were not quite kosher morally, that you might not want to be close to. But you needed their alliances, and so you did it. And I think that's true in America as well. To be a leader is to reach beyond your particular following and reach out to other communities. That's part of what leadership is about. Do you have another question?
That is all for the questions.
Well, so Dana, you have a question? Joan, you have a question? Tim, question? Larry, question? Come on, let's wait a minute. Let's wait 30 seconds. We won't have silent airtime. I can fill the time quite happily, but let's encourage people to ask us, to ask us questions. I don't think we're living in a time of rampant anti-Semitism, and I want to, since you've given me the airtime, I want to repeat something that a student said to me last night. what would be your parting words? Because, it was the end of the evening and also these students are about to graduate. And of course, I remembered Heschel's parting words at his interview with Carl Stern right before he died. And Carl Stern said, "Do you have any words for young people?" And he told them about making their life into a work of art. And my word to them was, don't be afraid. It makes bad Jewish policy, bad Jewish identities, bad Jewish communities when we're guided by fear. And I said, if you want to be a Jewish leader, whether it's of a college age group or a group in their 20s or 30s or older people, yeah, some fears are legitimate and you've got to protect yourself. And we put in those metal detectors at JTS because we have reason to be wary of people out there who want to do us damage. But the Jewish community operates too often on the basis of fear. And I said, if you want to be a Jewish leader, exemplify love and kindness and concern and justice and piety, traditional Jewish virtues, and bring people to Judaism by those things, by all those positive things, by the Kedoshim to you things, and not from fear. And so I would just make the same plea to older Jewish leaders, whether it's rabbis who are with us tonight or lay leaders or parents or teachers or anyone. Let's not succumb to fear. Let's be sober about it. Let's know who our enemies are. Let's protect our interests and our values. But let's have a Judaism that's motivated by our values, by doing good things in the world, and not by fear. And I have to tell you, that's a lesson that I was first taught by Zionism. I didn't learn it as a Jew growing up in Philadelphia in the 1950s and early 1960s. I was proud of my parents, proud of my synagogue, proud of my friends. But it was when I got to Israel, and I first came to Israel to do my PhD in 1975, and I came in the summer of 1974 to make the arrangements. And when I got there in 1975, I realized I'm here in a country that came within one tank battle on the Golan, God forbid, from being overrun 2 years earlier. And I didn't see a country that was cowering. I saw a country that was vibrant and joyous and celebratory, and part of what I'm saying Hallel for next week on Yom Ha'atzmaut is to thank God for the example of Jews who know what it is to infuse life into the world and live with positive energy and to not cower. The reaction to Acharei Mot in that case, and there really was a lot of death. And a lot of Israelis suffered losses in 1973. And here I was in 1975, and the place was humming with vibrancy, and I couldn't get over it. And I felt more alive than I'd ever felt before as a Jew. And I was wondering, how do we do this? And that's my model for all of Jewish life. And it's certainly something that JTS stands for. We want to build a Judaism here of vibrancy and energy and hopefulness and service and love of the Jewish people and love of God and love of Torah. And that's what we're trying to infuse. And if we can help you all do that, or you can help us do that, please, let's work on it together.
Thank you, Chancellor Eisen, for your being a role model yourself and positive inspiration. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you again, all our generous synagogue partners and their congregants. Please fill out the evaluation form below and in the next few minutes. On behalf of Chancellor Eisen, good night from JTS.